Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Limberg, the steward of the Stoa, and the Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And today is Thanksgiving here in Canada. I'm from Toronto, Canada. So I'm going to invite everyone in the chat to start. Just write something down that you're thankful for in this very moment. And while people are writing in the chat, I will share what I'm thankful for. I am thankful for this community, the strange community called the Stoa, that's surrounded with people who are not following a script and are co-writing the story together. It's beautiful, and I'm very grateful for it. So today, we got Daniel Schmachtenberger, Sensemaker in residence for the month of October. And this is a digital porch, so there's no agenda or theme. We're just going to come sit on the digital Stoa and then ask Daniel some questions. And there's a spreadsheet too. Let's just see here. Bum, 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 bum. I think someone shared it already for people who just came in. Anybody wants to take notes, just start taking notes. We're going to have, this is 90 minutes, and after this, in the same link, Tyson Wagner is going to do rap unbattles, which he'll explain what that is at the end. So if you want to do something interesting, just hang on. So yes, like I said, this is a digital porch. We're just going to ask Daniel some questions. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box. I will call on you. You unmute yourself, ask it to Daniel. If you don't want to be on YouTube, indicate that. I'll read the question on your behalf. And as Daniel said in the first question, you know, he can talk about all this kind of like sense-making type issues and everything in different platforms, but feel free to get personal. Have some kind of questions that are, you know, localized to what's going on in your world that might be related to other people as well. An example like Hannah, when Daniel came a couple of weeks ago, Hannah Robbins talked about anxiety attacks that she had, and Daniel gave some excellent advice. So, you know, feel free to go there, and I'll curate the questions and have a bias towards those. So that being said, I will allow everyone to unmute themselves. Daniel, how are you doing today, my friend?
Good. I'm happy to be here. Last time was fun, and yeah, I enjoy this opportunity to just kind of be with the questions that are actually alive and interesting for people.
And so I kind of wanted to start to check in with you. If there's any kind of questions or concerns that are alive for you right now, maybe related to the project you're working on or something personal that us at the Stoa could reflect on, maybe stay with for a bit, which in turn can serve sort of as a looping effect that might inspire us to ask certain questions or make comments which assist you in your thinking and whatever is alive. So I'll throw that as the first question.
There's certainly things with regard to project we're working on that could use help of people who are interested in helping, and that would be an interesting thing to come to later. But I don't really want to go in a project or tactical direction to begin with. I will say something that was on my mind as I was coming into this session today. I was reading your letter that you posted of the chess moves, and thinking about some of the questions on power last time. And I don't know if there are more questions that people have asked in that direction, but there was something that I wanted to share kind of about that is, I think it gets very easy when we start saying, if those who are focused on the commons long-term don't learn how to be effective at making things happen within current environment, then they won't be effective. And so there's a need to learn influence, power, etc. I think it's easy for that to be a slippery slope into getting captured by Moloch and justifying a bunch of unconscious ego things very quickly. And most people, it actually wouldn't really benefit them to have more power because they don't have particularly clear ideas on how to solve anything to begin with. And so you have to say, like, is there a problem that I understand well enough and have some solutions that really need to be implemented, where the key thing is better capacity to implement. And most people don't have that much power over their own self, meaning that much coherence between the parts of themselves. And so I would say, like, as far as power literacy, learn how to have power in your relationship with the Facebook feed and with food and with the various things that you want regarding the allocation of your own attention and time first. And once there is some significant capacity to actually control your own attention, then you can start thinking about power literacy more. Otherwise, I think it's largely a wrong order of operations, of focus.
So sovereignty comes to mind, and I'm curious how you wrestled with becoming more sovereign in your life, and maybe when you were doing the psychotherapeutic work, what kind of common themes and advice did you give for people to become more sovereign?
I remember one time, there's a lot of different answers to that, right? There's everything from a meditation practice where you just choosing to do it regularly at all involves a certain kind of commitment and discipline. And to be able to control your thoughts to increasing degree, if you're doing a concentration style meditation, to be able to control your body, to not scratch the itch, to notice it and to not scratch it. Like, these are a lot of ways to be able to notice impulses and not have to automatically act on them. And I mean, cold showers and ice baths where you consciously relax your body when it wants to contract. There's a lot of places to be able to bring unconscious or automated processes under increasing volition. And then there's the inquiry into where do the compulsive, addictive patterns come up the most? And is there some conditioning or trauma or whatever underneath that needs worked through? So there's a lot of answers, but the one I was about to start saying is, I remember one time I got into, really looking at addiction and kind of addiction recovery ideas in my early 20s. And so I didn't have anything that people would normally call an addiction, meaning there was nothing that was really not overeating or drugs or sex or relationships or anything that was really damaging my life. But I wanted to look at damaging my life in a really overt way. But I wanted to look at all the places where there was compulsion, where I would routinely do something that was not aligned with my highest choice executive function for myself and values for myself. And I identified like 30 different things that were subtle forms of addiction, from relationship with food to exaggerating stories to sound cooler when talking to people, and then afterwards being like, fuck, why did I do that? It wasn't overtly lying, but it was embellishing. And then looking at what is underneath that. The food thing would oftentimes happen, like, what are the triggers? Happens when lonely or bored or whatever. So what are the ways of dealing with that? The embellishment thing has insecurity underneath it. And so just inventorying all of the places where behavior is being compelled more than it is being clearly chosen, and then looking at why and how to work with that. And there is some patience required in that process, because it can be very painful to notice how much we are actually not volitional, and yet a lot of reactions to that make us less volitional. So if I go into like feeling really depressed about that, did I choose to go into feeling really depressed, or was that also an automated thought and emotional reaction? Was that reaction at all helpful or aligned with the things that I care about? And for me, the idea of not actually having volition to be able to be more aligned with what was meaningful to me was more painful than anything else. this is not true for everybody. We have different things that kind of move us. But the idea that there are some kind of just automated patterns that would predict my behavior in my life was just such a dreadful idea that I really wanted to be able to notice wherever those occurred and at least be able to stop and then say, if I wasn't being controlled by some patterns, what would I choose? And then that gets into the existentialism of what is my basis for choice and what is fundamentally meaningful and why, those kinds of things.
Were you always so clear on what was most meaningful for you? And was it like the articulation of it? I imagine it changed throughout the years. And how do you have like a system or mechanism in place that updates it?
There's a long time where my felt sense of what was meaningful and my cognitive understanding of the existential basis for meaningfulness writ large or objectively or something like that would come into conflict. And there was a point at which that got resolved. Because whenever I would see an animal hurt in front of me, I didn't have to ask any questions about meaningfulness to just be completely clear that I wanted to help them. Or when I would see a person in need or hurting, there was an eminent or an embodied sense of meaningfulness that was prima facie. But then in being able to reflect on it and say, well, why is that thing meaningful? And the answer is something else. Well, why is that thing meaningful? And which always gets into a question about Big Bang and the second law of thermodynamics and whatever. And fundamental randomness and determinism, I would get challenged. So one thing that I remember really helped me was starting to recognize the actual eminent felt sense of meaningfulness and purpose beyond my understanding of it. I remember there was a quote by somebody, I don't remember who it was, I think it was misattributed to Rilke, that said, the heart knows reasons that reason knows nothing of. And Thurman, I think. And I thought about and reflected on how kind of true that was for me. And then, it was Joseph Campbell said something to the effect, is paraphrase, that searching for the meaning of life is what we do when we are disconnected from the actual experience of the meaning of life. But that what people are actually seeking for is a feeling of aliveness. And that very few people, when they actually feel actively engaged in life, are asking the existential question around its meaningfulness. It wasn't till later that I got Gödel's incompleteness theorem and Tarski's incompleteness of formal logical systems and started to be able to make sense of what that meant with the first verse of the Tao Te Ching, to be able to get that I wasn't going to have a semantic framing of the meaningfulness of all of reality that was somehow outside of reality and could ground it. And so logic is able to understand the bounds of logic, both the utility of it and the bounds of it. So I think the question is, was it always clear to me? Experientially, yes. And cognitively, I was progressively trying to find coherence between my intellectual understanding and my experience.
Awesome. All right, let's pivot to the chats. It's going crazy right now. Okay, you had a question on children. If you're going to mute yourself and ask it to Daniel. Are you there, Do?
Yep. Okay, I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Sounds good. So Daniel, thanks for being here. My questions, I wanted to know, what are your thoughts about having children? And, given how hard it is to be happy, even in the best of circumstances, being in a first world country, having all the financial resources, being relatively safe, that plus and it's really difficult to be happy, plus the existential risk that you bring up, plus, like the resources needed to raise kids, and the opportunity cost to use those resources to help other people. How can one justify having a baby or bringing a life into existence? And, am I just a depressed anti-natalist for asking that question? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an increasingly common question. And I don't have anything like an algorithm for how to answer if you should have children or not across the board. I can tell you a few considerations that come to mind for me. And it's tricky because there are considerations that are a bit conflicting. There's, at the micro level of the way I would answer it, if we weren't thinking about population and resource issues and future catastrophic risk and the opportunity cost of what the person who's a parent could be doing with their time, and just focused on their own learning and quality of life and experience versus kind of a macro way of answering it. And they're both important. There are plenty of people that are just bad parents, and being a parent doesn't make them grow up all that much. But in general, becoming a parent is the most emotional maturity developing thing for people. And that doesn't mean that can't happen other ways. But if someone really wants to be a good parent and they are a thoughtful, committed person, there's a bunch of things that happen. They start putting the consideration of someone else in front of themselves because they don't want to wake up in the middle of the night to feed the baby, but the baby needs fed. And so there is a movement out of young person, childish narcissism being the center of the universe thing that starts to happen that is extraordinarily maturing and valuable for people. And then there's thinking about this little person developing into a person and who they're going to become and what is nature and what is nurture and how they're being conditioned, that has people start to reflect on their own conditioning and how would I want this child to grow up and where am I not aligned with it? Where would I want them to be different than me? And then can I actually help them be different than me based on what I said? Or are they going to imprint watching who I am? So how do I have to actually become more to be the kind of parent I want to be? I watch people grow a lot, and then I'm more invested in the future because I really care about something that is going to live beyond me. So I get more invested in the future and how do I create and leave a better place for them and start to have long-term thinking. So there's a lot of very good things that can happen for someone's mental, emotional, philosophical, spiritual growth in becoming a parent, and things that can actually make them a better citizen, because being aligned with a longer term future and being a better citizen can be very aligned. That said, there's plenty of people who have kids who don't spend that much time thinking about how to become, how the way that they are in their being is influencing this child, and aren't that philosophically reflexive or that disciplined or have that much time allocated. And it's always tricky because most any kid who grew up with, say, parents who didn't want to be parents or who were absent or whatever is still like, well, I'm glad they chose to have me because I'm glad that I'm here, right? And I went through whatever difficult processes. And had the person not been born, had the parents not chose to have kids, there wouldn't be a person saying, I'm really bummed that I'm not here, right? Like, it's always easy, no matter which path we go down, to say, I'm glad that we chose that path. So I have chose not to have kids, and well aware of the developmental possibilities in being a parent, and well aware of being able to help develop people that can be not just happy people, but also good citizens into the future. I had a very strong paternal instinct since I was young. And and a lot of people have this thought, and most people grow out of it. I didn't. Where I was aware of how many people and how many animals and how much life was unstewarded, untended. And I felt the calling to have that paternal instinct and drive tend to the life that currently exists that is untended, rather than bring new life. Because for me, the way I would want to be a father involves a amount of focus and dedication and time that, like, there is a real opportunity cost on time. I think people have different callings. I've seen some people, like I said, do better work in the world and become more efficient and when they have kids. I think carrying capacity wise, the planet would be better off with a lot less people than we currently have. That is not me promoting eugenics or catastrophe. It's just saying we're utilizing resources faster than the reproduction rate of the resources currently. I think that we see that while there has been a lot of concern about overpopulation, we also see that Japan's birth rate and some Nordic countries' birth rate became such that the populations actually start declining. And some people get concerned of a collapse in population. I think collapse in population matters for the current economic system, but it doesn't actually matter for civilization unless we're talking about massive infertility, because otherwise there will be correction dynamics. And the economic system that was predicated upon and needs continuous population growth has to end. That's not a long-term viable economic system. So what would I say about having kids? There's obviously a default impulse to just reproduce that every animal has. I don't think that's a good enough reason to be the best choice for how to live a life and to have kids in the current context. So rather than the default assumption of, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have kids, and it's like, that's just the thing that plays out. I think if someone feels that it is essential to their dharma to raise the future generations of civilization, that they feel a profound calling in that way. They're very called to childhood development theory. They're thinking about what would be a conscious, enlightened way to raise people. They are called to family and creation of family and community. If someone feels that it's central to their dharma, then they should do that. And if they don't, then I would like to see what they do feel is central to their dharma and then answer other things in light of that. Those are my initial thoughts.
Any follow-up question, Do?
No, that's all. Thank you very much.
All right. Tyler, you got a question on psychedelics. If you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Since we must escape from algorithm manufactured realities in order to do proper sense making, and since we must change our relationship to each other, the world, and ourselves to move from game A to game B, what role do psychedelics have to play in this transition? From personal experience, I even find if I'm microdosing, I find it much easier to put my phone away and recognize it as a stupid, damaging thing. So I know the answer is something, but I was just wondering what you had on that.
It feels like a couple different questions put together, because psychedelics can obviously have a role as they have historically, or plant medicines before an algorithmically mediated digital environment. And there are answers to the algorithm digital environments that don't necessarily involve psychedelics. So there's how do we deal with hypernormal stimuli is kind of one question. what is the therapeutic, developmental, evolutionary role of psychedelics, and then is there an intersection between those two questions? Let's talk about hypernormal stimuli first. I have noticed that people who chronically are checking their phone looking for notifications don't at Burning Man. And Burning Man's obviously its own hypernormal stimuli, but not just at Burning Man. They don't when they're camping with friends. If they're in an environment that's closer to the evolutionary tribal type environment that we developed in, where there's kind of a rich field of human interaction, they're less susceptible to addiction writ large. One of the things that I think about hypernormal stimuli is that we're more susceptible to them in a hypernormal environment of the healthy evolutionary stimuli that makes a healthy human social primate. So when people have more contact with nature that's bringing them into all of their senses, not just a kind of 2D screen, when they have more contact with other people, I see that they're called to go to the fridge and just look at what's in there less often. They're called to scroll the phone less often. Gabor Mate's work on that the biggest predictor for addiction is how lonely someone is. And the biggest kind of predictor for addiction is the depth and connectedness of the relational field. I think there's something very deep to this. So that's not the entirety of the answer of how do we deal with hypernormal stimuli, but I think a lot of hypernormal stimuli is an impulse to fill a certain kind of emptiness that most people's modern life has. And I think it's why there's so much call for people wanting to move to communities and back to the land type movements and things like that. So I think that we need to develop some resilience capacities to hypernormal stimuli in addition, but the foundation of it is, do I actually have a healthy, full life of the types of stimuli that make a healthy human being? Now, psychedelics can obviously bring you more into your senses and into kind of rich experience, where in the fullness of that kind of rich experience of you're on the mushrooms and the tree looks way more beautiful and the sky looks way more beautiful, that there's less of the kind of wanting some dopaminergic hit that the notification will give you. I'm not really oriented to a future where somebody needs to be continuously on psychedelics, even microdoses, to have enough presence that they aren't susceptible to hypernormal stimuli, though. Now, what is the role of psychedelics? We'll answer just kind of that other question. I would say the role of psychedelics, I'll describe as a subset of the role of state induction processes. That's not the only thing they can do. When you're microdosing it, it's not necessarily state induction, but for the most part, if you kind of think in an integral psychology term in terms of the difference between state induction and stage development and kind of shadow integration, psychedelics can induce experience, but that are temporary, right? They can induce very profound states, then they're going to go away. Then the question is, what is the persistent or lasting role of that state? And that is meaningful. And if there isn't some developmental process to integrate that state into stage, it can actually become kind of addictive. If the only way I have to have an experience of the beauty of life or the numinous or great insights is through psychedelics, and that doesn't start to become more of my baseline or have other ways of getting it, then I probably need to do psychedelics all the time. So I think psychedelics or breath work, like holotropic type breath work, or tantric type processes that use sexuality as a method of state induction, I think the state induction can be very powerful if it's part of a more integrated human development process. So the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, where you're, for instance, some of the way that trauma work has been done with MDMA, where if someone's chemistry works with MDMA well, they kind of chemically go into a place where they kind of can't feel bad, right? They feel so good at an experiential level. Then let's say they have a PTSD trigger about something, where every time they thought about that thing, they feel really bad. So now the person's on MDMA and they're getting facilitated to go think about that thing that always makes them feel bad, and they can't even access feeling bad now. But a new neurological association is happening with feeling this kind of blissful ecstatic state and thinking about this previous situation, where the next time, because we know memory consolidation is that we don't remember the original thing, we remember the way it has been reconsolidated each time we remember it. And the kind of Pavlovian association can change. Then the next time I think about that thing, I don't have the same immediate set of trauma patterns that are associated. That sometimes in like a single session, someone can have a enduring change with that kind of work. I had in my exploration with psychedelics, I had a general rule that I would have some clear intention, whether it was a ayahuasca journey or a peyote journey or whatever. And then as soon as I would start to come down from the experience, where I was still altered, but I was capable of thinking in full sentences and writing, I would start writing. And I would start writing all the insights, because what I found was, especially if you go into deep journeys, the states are so different that, like dreams, you kind of end up losing most of it. Like you can't even remember most of the actual, what did that feel like, and most of the details and the insights. And so like dreams, if the moment it's there, you capture it, you can start to build a bridge between your normal state and that state by being able to access the content of the dream or the psychedelic state in your normal consciousness. You start to be able to access it more. So as soon as I would start to come down from the journey, I would just start writing all the insights. And sometimes it was just an insight about like what the world is, the beauty of it, the nature of my experience. Sometimes it was specific insights about philosophy or psychology or whatever, or relationships. And then I would, a couple hours later, come back and reread it. And as I was rereading it, and I was now coming down even further, I was experientially further away from those experiences. But I was remembering them, and I'm like, oh yeah. And then what I would do is try and re-feel what I felt, right? And as I was writing, I knew I'd be coming back and rereading it. So I was setting this anchor of really noticing what I felt as I was describing it. So I was kind of linking a felt state to those words as I was writing them. So then I come back and a couple hours later, and then the next day and the next day, and I remember how I felt when I was writing it, and remember how I felt when I was in the journey associated with it. And so then I had this kind of, that was a huge part of integration. And then I had this general practice that whatever the insights were, I would do the practices I needed to integrate those before using that medicine again. So I didn't just become dependent on a bunch of external stimuli. I was using the external stimuli to gain insights to then actually do development work that became internalized. And so I think they can be extraordinarily powerful psychotherapeutic developmental tools used rightly. I think they can be damaging used wrongly, like any very powerful tool. If I go into so I'll give you a couple examples. If I go into a more neuroplastic state, one of the ideas is that there's increased plasticity, and so I can make new associations, so the psychotherapy or the learning can happen better. If I go into an increased plasticity state and have a really bad trip and just kind of run a bunch of neural loops on some very negative stimuli, I can actually come out kind of traumatized. And I've seen heaps of people do this. And I did this before in my earliest experimenting, before I kind of knew better. And so this is another thing, is that the experience itself while on the psychedelic or the entheogen, or whatever you want to call it, ends up having less enduring effect than the meaning you make of it and how you internalize it and how it ends up changing behavior and practice. And so the meaning making process is really key, and a good facilitator will make a big difference to this. So let's say somebody's on a mushroom journey on a high dose, and they start having a very clear hallucination of demons chasing them, and they're freaking out about demons chasing them. I've seen this many times. And someone uses a particular kind of metaphysical interpretation, and I'm actually quoting an example of something I witnessed many times. Someone gives an interpretation that those demons are in the astral realm, and they really are chasing the person, and the mushrooms are helping that person see into the astral realm, and it's because of bad things they did in a past life. So now, in order to fight that demon, they need to have a circle of salt and wear a feather and whatever. The person can come out believing in demons in an astral realm and bad past life stuff, where now they get scared anytime that feather that protects them isn't with them, and they're like thinking about demons, and they actually get messed up because of the cognitive interpretation of the experience. Now, let's say that same person's going in, they see the demon, and someone who has kind of an archetypal symbolic framework, psychotherapeutic framework, is working with them and says, hey, in this journey, whatever's arising in your mind is images in your mind, and that can't hurt you. Can't hurt you. So turn towards the demon rather than run away from it, and ask it what it wants. And they turn towards the demon, and the demon that is scary becomes their dad yelling at them when they were a kid. And then they continue to be in dialogue, and then it becomes their dad when he was a little kid being beat by his dad. And then they see a lineage of passed on trauma, and they see how they've embodied it. And now they have a meaning making that is very different, and they can actually really maybe walk away with a very empowered set of changes. So I think people having the right cognitive frameworks to interpret the experience is really important. And like I said, I think it can be damaging if done wrongly. I think the right medicines, the right dose, the right pacing, the right set and setting, the right interpretation, the right facilitation, all those things matter.
Cool. Any follow-up?
No, great. Thank you, Daniel.
So we'll pivot to dreams now. Randy, you had a question on dreams.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is perfect transition from what you just said about confronting the demons in your mind. I'll try to keep this brief. I'm curious about the role that dreams might have to play in relation to problem solving, creativity, and potentially to our collective sense-making practices. So just to throw out a couple stimulating tidbits, have you heard the story of the brilliant Indian mathematician Ramanujan? Born in 1887, he stated that the insight for his work came to him in his dreams on many occasions. Ramanujan said that throughout his life, he repeatedly dreamed of a Hindu goddess known as Namakal. She presented him with complex mathematical formulas over and over, which he could then test and verify upon awakening. Similarly, the melody to the Beatles song Yesterday came to Paul McCartney in a dream. He woke up and stumbled to the piano by his bedside to work out the chords. He says, I just fell out of bed, found out what key I had dreamed it in, and I played it. And just to give a quick personal example, I wasn't going to say this, but what you said about the demon. So when I was like 5 years old, I had a nightmare in which I encountered a monster in a cave, and I woke up and crying and telling my brother about it. He said, if that was me, I would have kicked that monster's butt. And wouldn't you know it, the very next night I had the same dream and I went lucid. I remembered what my brother had said and I confronted the monster. And since then, dreams have always felt very important to me. I learned to tie my shoes in a dream. Okay, so after all that, I'll give you two questions, one personal, one less personal. The first question is, given that your mind, Daniel, contains such rich, detailed models of reality, and the fact that you are so driven to solve some of the world's most perplexing problems, I'm curious if your dreams play any conscious role in this process, Have you ever done any lucid dreaming or had any insights in a dream to problems that you've been working on? Or on a less personal note, are you aware of or have you ever considered the role that shamanic dreaming, aka lucid dreaming, and the shared interpretation of dreams could potentially play either in therapy or perhaps even in collective sense making? For example, while lucid dreaming is you can face your fears, phobias, etc., like I mentioned. Thank you for your patience in listening to that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, when Ramanujan got kind of found by Littlewood and Hardy and the rest of the math community, a lot of people got very interested, and if they could figure out how to have Ramanujan's dreams and have Durga come bring them infinite series math equations. And so far, unfortunately, nobody else seemed to become Ramanujan. What made him develop that way, and is that developable, is a very interesting question. I have done some dream interpretation and lucid dreaming work, not nearly as much as many people have, so I'll say the few thoughts that come to mind. If someone starts thinking about something consistently enough, it's very common that they'll start dreaming about it. There's that whole thing when you're learning a language, especially in immersion, when you shift to start dreaming in that other language, you have a sense of like, okay, now there's actually a deep immersion happening. Someone who's playing chess all the time will dream chess moves. And so, of course, a musician who's immersed in music or a mathematician who's immersed in that, their subconscious is going to be processing things that their conscious mind is processing. And so the idea of, this is one of the things that actually in the startup world, there's a famous kind of thinking about this, which is people who are investing in a startup and venture capitalists want whoever's doing the startup to be so focused on it that they dream about it, right? That idea that you have enough focus on this thing that it is what actually engages all of your discretionary creativity. And that sometimes means sleeping dreams, sometimes it means daydream, sometimes it means what pulls you out of reverie or meditation or whatever it is. So there's definitely something to being intensively enough focused consciously that your other than conscious mind is also processing those topics. And I have definitely had in my life experience, whenever my focus becomes pretty intense on a certain set of problem solving, I dream about that and will have, interesting kinds of insights in the dream space. I find that the insights are, for me, better in the thoughts that take me out of meditation. So if I'm thinking about a problem and then I go meditate where I stop thinking about the problem and I'm using a breath or mantra or something that clears mind, then there'll be oftentimes a solution to the problem I was working on or an insight that kind of emerges out of that quietness, but I'll remember more of it because I'm not transitioning from sleep state. But I know some people who practice lucid dreaming a lot who have that same experience there, but I would call these similar, right? They're just altered states of consciousness where the other than conscious mind gets to process the stuff the conscious mind has been processing. And when we look at scientists who have dreams like the snake biting its tail, giving the insight to the benzene ring or Ramanujan or whatever, there's really never stories like that where the people were not fully engrossed thinking about the thing who had the insights. And so there was a talk once between the Dalai Lama and Eckhart Tolle on this topic. And I'm only vaguely remembering it, but it was something to the effect of somebody asked, I think Eckhart, when you access the power of now, whatever you want to call it, when you access present silence, do you have the ability to do anything coming out of that space? That's a space where kind of all possibilities reside. Like, could you get the kind of math that Einstein would get in his reverie? And that both Eckhart and the Dalai Lama agreed that despite all of their meditation, they never got math. They never got physics, and they didn't get the ability to kick the key soccer play But the soccer player who takes a moment and drops into deeper presence does kick better than if they don't drop into presence, and so does the mathematician. That it's basically taking the input that that being has into a state that processes the input differently, which can then give new outputs from that kind of input. I did some study of psychics and channels in my early 20s. And what I found was that when I asked them objectively true and false questions, like somebody's social security number and things like that, that the channel or math questions or chemistry questions that should be true universally, the Pleiadian should know, or whatever Akashic record should have, but where the channel had never been exposed to that knowledge, they never got it right. Not one time in hundreds of times asking it. But that didn't mean it was pure gibberish. Oftentimes these people, when they were talking to someone about their family or divorce or life, said profoundly insightful things. The person's like, how the fuck did you know that? And the way that I interpreted it was their degree of insightfulness was proportional to, one, how much experience they had of that domain. So if they've paid attention to humans and relationships their whole life and really kind of paid attention, they have a pattern matching capability for something that they have a lot of pattern around. And then it was also proportional to how much they could let go of their assessment models and go to an other than conscious place, where you've got kind of conscious, these pieces of data, these axioms, these logical steps, rational process. Then you have other than conscious, lots of bandwidth. I just took in a set of inputs, and now my other than conscious mind is pattern matching this across a whole bunch of stuff, and something pops out. So you get an intuition that seems to be a aha out of nowhere. And so when the person would ask the Pleiadians a question or ask the angels a question or whatever it was, they were going into a quiet, receptive place. That was whatever the cognitive mechanism they needed to use was. And so what I would find is that they would actually do good pattern matching, and they would say to the person in front of them more often than statistically random, such and such is happening for you. You're going through a divorce or this, that, and the person's like, how the fuck did you know? And it's like, well, there are patterns across people who are going through similar experience. This person has been with tens of thousands of people in their life. They're kind of getting a gestalt, and then there's a pattern recognition on that gestalt. So I think intuitive space, meditation space, dreaming space, that kind of process can happen. So I'm not saying that it is accessing things from the Akashic record. I'm saying that it is accessing things from our own mind, brain, being through different processing, a different kind of processing that takes those inputs and processes them differently. Now, am I positive that no one accesses things from the Akashic record? No, of course not. It's a kind of an unfalsifiable proposition, but I don't have any evidence to believe it either. The other thing I'll say about dreaming is I don't think it's good to think in terms of dream interpretation, that a particular dream interpretation model is true, like objectively that snakes always mean this and water means this and whatever, or that everyone in the dream in a Jungian sense is an aspect of you. Like sometimes that's the right model, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the dream is clearly just kind of a smorgasbord of gibberish of whatever stimuli you had that day. Sometimes it feels like it's processing old trauma or whatever it is. So with dream interpretation, I think rather than say, what did the dream mean as if it has an objective meaning, for you to say, did this interpretation give me insight? Was the interpretation clarifying, insightful, useful? If so, awesome. And sometimes I've seen 10 different interpretations all be insightful. So if you take it as fodder for a inquiry process where the real benefit is happening through your own inquiry, and that's a starting point, I think that can be quite valuable. In the same way that I think tarot can be valuable. If you take it that the cards are being magically pulled for a specific reason and that they mean a specific thing, it's going to be nonsense. But if you take the cards as representing archetypes that you can interpret a million different ways, which happens, right? In different contexts, the same tarot reader is interpreting that card in a different way. And so you're really using them as archetypes for the exploration of something to see what fits. I think there's a lot of things like that that can be sources of insight, but one needs to be kind of grounded in how they're processing it. And last thing on the lucid dreaming, the intentional bringing things into dream space and trying to develop some volition. I have friends that are very deep practitioners of this and do like have a lot of personal growth and insight happen in the space. I've done some of it. I won't go into what the practices of how to lucid dream more effectively are, because that's kind of common knowledge and well written about. But I think the things you can do in lucid dreaming and the benefit they can have for you psychologically are a lot like psychedelic assisted psychotherapy possibilities. In the psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, I can see like that demon feels very real in a particular way, or I can visualize the event that happened in my childhood or whatever it was in a deeper, richer way. The same is true in the dream space. It's almost like I kind of get to go into an immersive experience place in my psyche. And so where somebody goes and confronts the demon, like you were mentioning, and sometimes all that happens is they confront it and the demon dies or runs away. But what that person needed to do was learn how to stand up and get courage. Or they find out what the demon really was. It becomes them, their own self-criticizing voice, or their dad, or their whatever it was. Like really powerful insight and healing can happen in that space. Okay. And if anybody learns how to get Ramanujan's dreams to happen on methodology, then I want to take that course.
Future session at the Stoa. All right. There's a culture war happening in the chats right now. Some people want, let's talk about system change. Let's talk about inner work. And so Arran is doing some mimetic mediation with his question. So Arran, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question to Daniel.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you. Yeah, someone made a comment in the chat that the session seems to be steering towards inner work instead of a more kind of external systems change. And so I responded to that saying, what is the proper balance of inner work and activism? Sort of the internal motivation for change and the external motivation for change, and does one precede the other?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I will just say for context, we can talk about whatever here. And I think last time there was a combination of inner work and call it systems questions. I don't really talk about psychology or personal philosophy in other public forums. So I told Peter I was quite happy to have this one go in more of a kind of personal philosophy, psychology orientation, because I don't really, there aren't other forums where I do that. And I don't know if any, I mean, it's kind of strange having people ask me my thoughts on these, and I'm not an expert on all these topics, so I don't know if it's useful. But answering the question of, is there an order of operations between personal inner work and Dharma? I think the right way to think about it is kind of as a virtuous cycle or a reciprocal process, where as I develop myself, like my obvious capacity, right? My cognitive capacities to understand the problems, my social capacities to communicate effectively towards organization and problem solving, my psychological disposition to be clear and not, being taken off by disruptions. Obviously, as I'm developing myself, I have more capacity to do things in the world. But it's also true that as there are things in the world I really want to do, it's the best motive to develop myself. And to develop myself in a more focused, less navel-gazing way. And because if I'm just wanting to develop myself because I have some generalized goal of enlightenment or whatever, it's endless, right? Like I can keep finding new little patterns that I have and little traumas and areas to grow forever, and new states to reach and new methods to inquire into. And I stay basically self-focused, which is kind of narcissistic in its focus. And oftentimes that impulse is actually the expression of trauma itself. It's the expression of I'm not good enough. And the way to become good enough, sometimes is get really buff, sometimes it's get really rich, sometimes it's get famous, sometimes it's really do development work on myself. Or become really smart, but it's actually an expression of I'm not enough coming out in that way, where you're actually healing some things and doubling down on the core trauma. Whereas if I have a sense of I'm going to die and all my development will kind of not matter anymore. Like I take my development with me when I die, right? The things that I learn don't stay in the field outside of work that I produce and ways that I touch other people and touch the world. So if my life is pretty short in duration, but life is going to continue, and my life isn't the only thing meaningful to me. Life with a capital L is meaningful to me, and my experience, but other people's experience is meaningful. Then I want to say, well, in the short time that I'm here, what is it that I really care to, how do I want to touch the world that ripples on beyond me in scope to other people and beyond my life and time? And as I really think about that, and I think about what actually is meaningful to me, what is sacred to me, what is worth allocating the finite bit of my life energy towards, then that can inspire a kind of development in dharma, right? Development in a sense of meaningfulness, purpose, mission, and capabilities. But also it will show me the personal work that I need to do of what's in the way of me being good at that. And so let's say I notice that my work would be really benefited by public speaking, but I'm too afraid of public speaking. But like what I feel is mine to do here and that matters to me in a way more than my own life would be benefited by that, then I fucking do the work to get over the fear of public speaking. Not just because of some generalized, I'm growing myself in all these different ways, but because I'm not gonna let some lack of skill or some trauma or some disposition get in the way of me and what I'm here for. And so there's a deeper motive and more focus of what to focus on. If I find that I can't actually empathize or tune in with other people enough that they like working with me, so everybody quits, then I'm like, okay, there's interpersonal work that I need to do, because otherwise I can't be effective towards the things that matter to me. So I think one's focus on what they feel called to contribute to can be a context setting for their own personal development in their skills and their psychological work. And then of course, as they grow in their skills, they start thinking of other things that they could do that they didn't even know they could do before they had that skill. And as they grow in their psychological work, they have more insight about, oh, that thing I felt really called to do was actually me just projecting my trauma on the world. I needed to protect everybody because I couldn't protect my mom when I was little, or my kid sister, or whatever it was. And so there's this reciprocal relationship that as my skills develop, as my own internal awareness develops, and as healing occurs, and as my experience of trying to benefit what I care about in the world develops, they can all enrich each other.
Cool. Arran, any follow-up?
There's always infinite follow-ups, but no, that's thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Great. So we're going to go with Margaret, then Evan and Amber. So Margaret, if you can unmute yourself.
So my question is, Daniel, do you have a method for organizing your mental architecture? And how do you personally store and access various types of information and memories?
Say a little bit more about the context of the question.
I'm curious to hear, it's a question I've asked to many people. I'm just curious if I would assume everyone's mental architecture is different and unique. I guess I'm curious about if you have a process for how you work with yours or restructure it as necessary, as well as in this context, you are accessing a lot of information about different subjects and actively listening to the questions and drawing out pieces of it. And you're managing to weave together very complex answers across many domains, which I would guess speaks to in part your experience in investigating those domains, but also something that's happening within your physical and mental structure to allow for that, like network.
Yeah, I get the question now. So having a knowledge and experience set that is very interconnected and very flexible in terms of what things might be relevant, what things might be most relevant. Because like for any of these questions, I could answer them 100 different ways, and we could take a very long time. So there's a question of like, and I don't know that I'm getting it right, but what seems like the most relevant way for this particular question in this particular context and the amount of time that makes sense. Somebody asked me earlier today whether they should go back to graduate school or what the right process was to learn better analytical skills. And they ended up asking questions very much like this of how do I learn many different analytical processes and connect them together and know which one to apply, how to know which epistemologies or methodologies would apply well to which domains. Are you saying that's not the question?
Yeah, that's not the question, but I'm happy to hear an answer to it.
Well, yeah, it's not the question, but I think it's the answer might be related. What I shared with him is that the learning process that I mostly utilized, I mean, I had some time where I took college courses and learned like fixed curriculum. But even when I did that, when I was taking in the curriculum, I was thinking about how the knowledge in whatever field related to everything else that I knew and how I would apply it and how I would apply it to all different kinds of problem sets. But for the most part, my study happened in the context of trying to figure out specific problems I was interested in. So the example that I gave him, because he had been interested in like what actually happened in 9/11, which is a very interesting and tricky research topic. And I said, so if I was studying that, you would see a group like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth talking about the temperature of jet fuel and the melting temperature of steel. But I would need to get into what kind of steel. So there's some metallurgy I would need to learn, and there's some kind of construction, structural engineering around the kinds of steel that went in there, and the temperature of weld joints, and then there's some kind of thermodynamics and chemistry regarding jet fuel. Does it always burn at the same temperature, or what if I have a strong kind of chimney effect or draft? So there's like a bunch of different domains, and then the impact of the plane. There's like classical mechanics that I need to do to be able to factor that, and how would that correspond to Richter scale for how the building was designed to be able to impact stuff, and then thinking about the claims of what NORAD was doing that day, or what the CIA knew, or what the FBI knew. Then I'd be like, do I actually understand how the branches of government work and what each of those groups do and how they're connected? So my study would be, there's a topic I want to figure out, and if I really pay attention to, as I'm trying to make sense of it, what other people are referencing, I actually don't know most any of what they're talking about. Like I don't know the metallurgy, I don't know the burning temperatures, I don't know the structures of government well enough to know if NORAD said that versus Strategic Air Command, what that means. So I would it all seemed relevant. It all seemed interconnected and relevant, because otherwise I'm like, okay, well, I'll just take their word on that, and I really don't know what I'm talking about, but now I'm building a logical model based on something I don't really know what I'm talking about. And so then I would go down Wikipedia rabbit holes or whatever encyclopedias or university sites I would find to try to study that stuff. And I wouldn't actually have to make a rigid taxonomy because it was connecting based on authentic curiosity. And I was thinking through how all these things connected. So there was a natural kind of synaptic taxonomy that occurred where everything was connected to everything else through the process of even how it was being studied. And then what happened was those same topics were just as flexibly interconnectable, not in that initial point of inquiry, but now in the other point of inquiry, because everything I learned happened that way. So I think how someone is learning originally is, are there these separate subjects with clear divisions, or is there the study of how reality works and the interconnectivity between all the domains? So I think it wasn't till later in life I started thinking in formal taxonomies and taxonomy theory, and where a kind of bottom-up folksonomy or where a top-down taxonomy works best, different ways of taxonomizing things and why those would be useful. And then there were meta taxonomies based on deeper ontology. This was actually something that specifically forest eminent metaphysics created a formality for me that I had not had before, was this idea in the metaphysics that a way of defining a domain of inquiry, what the boundary of inside and outside the domain are, and then the three axioms, that there are these three orthonormal ontological bases in each one, and that there's a relationship between those ontological axes that are defined by those axioms. And so then when I'd be looking at any domain, I'd be converting it into that as a kind of meta ontology, just like some people do with integral. Integrals are much less formalized. And so I kind of got into different meta ontological models. That was the most formal and fundamental one I found. And then that took the organic way I had learned and started reifying it and allowing me to navigate it more precisely and consciously. And even just like, I like taxonomies, just even formal ones, knowing everything that's wrong with them. I like being able to take a paper before writing it. Like typically, if I'm working with a team and they're going to write something, I always ask them to do an outline first to see, are we clear on the main concepts before we flush them out, the questions, the whatever. I like taxonomies of questions. But I also know that I could do that taxonomy a bunch of different ways. Do I have 3 fundamental categories? Do I have 5? What is the benefit and damage of doing it different ways? So there was also just playing with mappings of different kinds of taxonomies and this is where it's like, no model's true, they're all useful, where then I became very unattached to any particular taxonomical models, but quite comfortable with being able to use them and do mappings between them.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that this is not like, I guess I was trying to ask a question about direct information encoding, and I'm hearing that your chosen method is using these taxonomies and meta ontological models in order to map that information to domains, which then have connections and can be restructured at will.
Yes. Did you mean more like, how do I actually store information on my computer?
Well, your human computer, perhaps,
yeah.
or like whatever you may view as your consciousness and mind.
Yeah, I think the answer I gave is the clearest answer, but if there is a follow-up question on the part I didn't address, let me know.
That's good for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I got a follow-up question on like cognitive organization. How do you get shit done? Like what's your time management system, and how do you negotiate between all the shit you have to get done in orientation to what is most meaningful?
You want me to do like productivity principles, basics that I find useful.
Sure. Like it could be anything from getting things done by David Allen, anything that you apply or a bespoke system that you use that you think could be generalizable.
Yeah, I did David Allen and Franklin Covey and Tony Robbins' time of your life system and a bunch of those. And they're all like, there's valuable stuff in all of them. The David Allen kind of brain dump everything in a place that you'll keep coming back to so your mind doesn't keep looping the thing to kind of free up cognitive space. That's super valuable. I'll tell you a few of the kind of productivity practices that I actually use regularly, which is different than all the ones that I know that I don't end up actually using regularly, but probably would be good if I did. I make sure in my work that I have very clear outcomes. So I know the theory of it, right? I know the philosophy, I know the values, but then it comes down to clear outcomes at a particular time. And the outcomes that I'm responsible for are less than 5, usually 3, but never more than 5. And so everything has to chunk that way so that I don't have to go reference it to look those up. Those can be clear and top of mind. Like I know the outcomes that I'm moving forward towards. And then every possible call or engagement or email has to be in light of which of those outcomes is it moving forward, and is it the most effective thing I can do to move that outcome forward. And then of course, when one of those outcomes is completed and a new one emerges, like the 5 can change, and they should change over time, but that's one thing. And then there is a above the line practice that I actually find quite useful, which is towards the 1 or 2 or 3 outcomes that is most meaningful, critical, timely, and leveraged current today. There's 1 to 3 things that I am for sure going to get done before I go to sleep that are the highest leverage things towards that. And then there might be 50 other things on my to-do list that I'd like to get done that are below the line, where I make sure I get the above the line ones done first. There's a few things that does. It actually allows someone to be able to rest when they need to rest, because they know the thing that they really needed to get done got done. And as opposed to the general sense that I never got enough done. And it makes sure that the highest leverage things get first priority. And it makes sure that you're thinking about priority clearly enough. Also, if I say I have 20 to-do items that have come in through conversations I had with the team and conversations I had with external people and emails and whatever, and they're chunked under an outcome, it doesn't automatically mean I look through those 20 and put them in descending order of which one's most important towards the outcome. There might be a way to move the outcome forward that's more effective than any of those. So I look at all those to make sure I know what they are. I look at the consequence of not doing them in a time that was said, but I also give myself some time to think about strategically, is there a higher leverage thing I could do to move that outcome forward? In designing these, I do use theory of bottlenecks, of saying, for the overall project to succeed, what are the bottlenecks? And then is there an order of operation of the bottlenecks? Sometimes there's more work to do than the team can do, and human resources are really a bottleneck. I need more people. And sometimes capital is the thing that is the bottleneck to that. I need to raise money to be able to get those people on. And maybe the bottleneck to that is I need to put some fundraising materials together. So I get very clear, like fundraising materials, close funds, but I'm closing funds for people. So I know exactly how much fund I need, and don't keep raising beyond that to then start to get the people on, and which people first. So theory of bottlenecks, and also just general considerations of leverage. Which things that I do leverage the existing team and other people's work and the rest of my work more effectively. That's all just kind of like strategy and planning. But then the tactics is things like making sure that it's not too many categories at once for a given month or quarter, and that you're clear for that particular day. Daily planning is obviously not enough because you need to book appointments. And so you're also going to be looking at kind of weekly and monthly planning and having some regular process to do that planning aligned with what the strategic objectives are. Now, I'm also talking about if someone is in a position where being responsible for the strategic objectives is their role. If I have a job at a company, I might not do any of this stuff that I'm talking about because someone else might be setting strategic objectives and I'm focused on doing a really great job executing. I think that's actually one of the problems is so many of the, not all of, but a lot of the kind of current productivity tip books were written by entrepreneurs, and then everybody has like some assumption that being an entrepreneur is a better thing. And I actually think for most people, having a job is better than being an entrepreneur because being able to stop work at a certain point and not being responsible for everybody's payroll and all like that, but just being able to go and do good work towards an organization they believe in, like, is awesome. And for most people, figuring out how to be responsible for the outcome of the project and everybody's payroll and like that is just stressful in a way that is typologically not fit. So I think it's important to not have this idea that everybody should be an entrepreneur, or like if you're reading Robert Greene, the idea that everyone should be a general, like it just, life doesn't work that way, not supposed to work that way. So there's different tips based on the type of role that you'd be in for productivity. And honestly, the most effective thing I have found for my own productivity by far is having someone good at it help me with it regularly. So it's kind of like why some people who are bodybuilders still take a trainer to the gym, or at least a workout partner that's focused on the thing with them, is not necessarily that they're missing the knowledge or the fundamental capability. But if I'm wanting to go to failure in my sets, then all of my attention and energy is in that, rather than paying attention to how many seconds I was in time under tension and if that's progressing from the way it was previously and how many seconds between this set and the next set. So having someone else hold the context so that I can be all the way in on the process, like anytime someone wants to go all the way in, that decreases their need for task switching between different types of cognitive functions. So this is where having the right kind of executive assistant or chief of staff or somebody like that, if someone is in one of those positions, can be enormously helpful. So when I have someone who knows what my strategic objectives are and is holding all of the inbound requests and all the things that I'm saying I'm wanting to do, they're holding and organizing the whole GTD thing, and then checking in with me to make sure that it's optimized. That means that I get to stay in the optimization, I get to stay in doing the optimized tasks outside of the time that I'm doing strategic planning, not continuously moving back and redoing organization. And honestly, with all of the organizational tools I learned, nothing was as effective as having someone's help.
Awesome. All right, so we'll end with one more question. It's a juicy one. Evan and Amber, you're up. If you can unmute yourself.
Hey, so my question, and I wrote it as the top 3, but feel free to change the number given the time and where you want to go with it. So I'm wondering, so what questions do you have right now, Daniel, which you believe are answerable, and not just by some super intelligence or something, but practically speaking, and you don't know the answer to these right now, and you think would be most valuable to you, or to say to you personally, to know the answers to these things?
There's a set of questions that are more theoretical, and then there's a set of questions that are more tactical. I'm very much actively asking questions around things about faster processes for being able to help certain types of human development at scale. People's development in their epistemics, in their emotional maturity, in their interpersonal skills. And what are the upper bounds of how effectively we can do that? What percentage of the population needs to have what amount of development within what different types of governance systems to be effective? What type of development what is the kind of Gaussian distribution on human development in different ways that we can expect from raising humans differently, different models of kind of how we could do development at a longer term civilization scale? I have a lot of questions in this space right now. That are more kind of theoretical. In terms of more tactical things, working on for this kind of sense-making project. The Consilience project is going to have sense-making content it puts out, but it's more focused on how does it actually facilitate a cultural movement towards better quality sense-making and better quality dialogue, so that our capacity for problem solving together actually emerges. And so the products we put out, the kind of news and the kind of meta news analysis, is actually to be an attractor for people to come to where there's better, more earnest sense making, but also to be a place where we're doing open source prototyping of what it could be and encouraging people to copy it and innovate and utilize these things. Because the project's gonna have a 5-year time to live. And so its goal is to catalyze, basically to take care of stewarding the information commons and the epistemic commons while trying to catalyze the commons to steward itself through a number of things, a number of different ways of doing that. So how we best do the kind of innovation prize and innovation environment, what the categories of the innovation prizes would be, and how we bring together the right sources of capital, the right sources of distribution with the right projects and the right talent to be able to facilitate everything from the best projects in civics education for high school students to the best projects in creating web browser plugins that automatically fact check and look for Lakoff frames, to the best projects that correct bias in journalism or peer review, like all of those that are part of the info and epistemic commons. So how do we facilitate the movement? How do we design the prize? How do we design the forums such that the best sense making and the best good faith dialogue are what emerge? And how do we engender the most effective types of collaboration and not the dysfunctional types of competition in that environment? These are probably some of the questions that I'm focused on having good, tangible answers quickly to.
Any follow-up, Evan?
No, thank you. That was wonderful.
Beautiful. All right, so we're going to wrap it up now. Before I close out, Daniel, any kind of closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to summarize or anything that came to life today?
Yeah, I think the question of, are we addressing more personal philosophy, psychology topics or systemic topics? Maybe you have some way of getting people's input on what they are seeking and what is useful. I don't know if this is useful, and I don't want to make a poor use of anyone's time. And so before the next one, I actually have, this is an interesting thing about convening. I have a very strong value around giving people good calibrated expectations when inviting them to something of what the thing is. So as a way of respecting their choice, is this a thing I want to come to and put my time into or not? So I wonder if we can clarify what people would really find useful, and then clarify what our intent is so they can come or not based on whether or not that resonates. That I would like that.
Cool. Yeah, I will do that. I think I'll probably do a survey or something after I launch this video on my mailing list and see what happens. And the frame is digital Porch, so it's like it's open-ended thing, but we can kind of firm it up for the next session. So that being said, Daniel, thanks so much for coming to the Stoa today. Everyone, thanks for coming. A couple announcements before I close out. Actually, I'll take in Tyson right now. Tyson, so we're having a Rap on Battles event on the same link right after this in about like a couple of minutes. So Tyson, could you plug that?
Yes, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Daniel. This is awesome, and I look forward to the next couple. So Rap on Battles, we are practicing freestyle, spoken word, and rap. So we play some beats and we talk with one another to practice sharpening our thinking, challenging one another's ideas and beliefs and ways of thinking, and engaging in some good faith dialectic through freestyle. And so the beats and the freestyle sort of forces us to speak into unknowingness and not prepare what we're going to say and practice getting into that group flow together. And last week was a lot of fun. Like, I had a really good time. So I look forward to seeing many of you there. You can participate or come prepared for Unbattle. The choice is yours, but no previous experience is required. So see you soon.
Thank you, Tyson. And we're launching a new series at the Stoa called Communitas Club. Margaret and I are going to run it, and it starts tomorrow. And Margaret, do you want to unmute and just kind of give it a plug and give people an understanding what to expect?
Sure. So we're hoping to create a space where we can explore different relational and intersubjective modalities and kind of create a bridge between propositional and participatory learning. So tomorrow, to set your expectations in case you don't want to attend, it's going to be more of a design session to kind of hear what's alive for the community of the Stoa and what people are interested in focusing on, and to get your ideas about how to structure sessions in a way that will give the most to the community. So tomorrow, 5:30, come share your opinions, thoughts. All are welcome.
Beautiful. And we're going to look at different modalities like circling, nonviolent communication, verbal aikido, for reflective structured dialogue. Forrest Landry's even come in to do his ephemeral group process. And the idea is just to kind of like talk about it, test it out, and maybe port it into the Stoa's wisdom gym and kind of create some bespoke psychotechnologies. So that being said, you can go RSVP to everything on the website, thestoa.ca. You can also check out our Patreon and our Substack. So that being said, everyone, thank you so much for coming to Stoa today. And just hold on tight. We'll play some music, and then I'll tag in Tyson in a moment.